Yeah, welcome in. Welcome back to another episode of the Format Podcast. Got a pretty interesting show for you here today. Going to talk about Jalen Rose and his recent comments about the state of the modern NBA. But before we get to that, you know what time it is. If you're here on YouTube and you haven't already, please make sure you go ahead, click that like, that subscribe, that notification bell. Make sure you're kept up to date whenever we drop new content on the channel. If you want the audio only version of the podcast, open up your audio podcast platform, hit the search bar, type in the Format Podcast, and we should come right up. If you're enjoying the content, make sure you give us that like, that 5-star review, and drop a comment. All that stuff helps us rise in the algorithm, helps us find more sports fans, helps more sports fans find us. And finally, make sure you write it down, put it in your phone, set an alarm, do whatever you got to do to remember. Saturday nights at 7 p.m. we are live here on the Format Podcast, and we'll give you the opportunity to call in, talk to us, get at me. I love it. I can't wait. Okay, so let's take a trip back down memory lane. I'm sorry. So the year is 1992, and former NBA Commissioner David Stern, he has a dream. No, not a dream like the late great Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, but he had a different type of dream. So, as the commissioner of any sports league, what's the goal? The goal is to work with the owners and to make the league the best it can be and to maximize profit margin. Okay, and so David Stern is trying to figure out how to build on the momentum that the NBA had gained from a dominant 1980s decade with Magic Johnson and Larry Bird. And then in the middle of the decade, Michael Jordan, Hakeem Olajuwon, Charles Barkley came in. So he wants to capitalize on that next wave of superstars and to take it to the next level. Okay, so he's trying to figure that out. He has a dream. In the meantime, uh, in 1988, the men's U.S. Olympic basketball team, I think they took home bronze at the Seoul Games. And basketball is generally a sport that's been dominated by the Americans for the most part. Not saying that up to this point there weren't still really good players overseas, but it was still for the most part an American game. Even going back to the 50s, 60s, 70s, often the United States would bring home the gold in international competition, had the best players, et cetera, et cetera. So 1988 games in Seoul, U.S. men's Olympic team brings home the bronze medal, and David Stern is trying to figure out, okay, how do we uh, how do we maximize the profit margin and expand the reach of the NBA? So now we have a situation where two things come together. The United States men's Olympic team wants to reestablish their dominance on the international stage, and David Stern wants to grow the game. Now, how do we go about this? Now, the men's Olympic team had been for amateurs up until this time. Meanwhile, the rest of the world was sending their professional players. Oscar Schmidt from Brazil. You got guys like him. You got guys like uh, man, Sabonis, Arvydas Sabonis, Domantas Sabonis' father, who is arguably one of the best international players of all time. Unfortunately, we never got to see him at his peak here in the United States, but that's a dude who was legendary. Guys like David Robinson can tell you all about him. And the reason we didn't see him, obviously, he played for what would become Lithuania, but at the time was the Soviet Union. And so he couldn't leave the Soviet Union to come play in the United States. But when the Soviet Union broke up, then we saw him get over here. But that was an older and diminished version of Arvydas Sabonis. But anyway, so we have this situation come together where the United States wants to reestablish its dominance on the basketball court in the international arena, and David Stern wants to grow the game. So what does he do? He puts together what's known as the Dream Team. He works with the United States men's basketball to put together the Dream Team. And with the Dream Team, we get what's widely regarded as the greatest basketball team of all time. And that was a hell of a team. And I still believe to this day that it's the greatest basketball team of all time. And the scary part is you didn't even get all of those guys in their absolute physical peak primes. So, like, imagine if you had gotten Magic Johnson and Larry Bird in their primes on that dream team. I mean, you thought it was bad, that team winning by an average of 44 points per game in those Olympics. Imagine those guys at their absolute best. It would have been even worse. But regardless, you had let me see if I can name them off the top of my head. You had Karl Malone and John Stockton. Of course, those guys were joined at the hip for pretty much their entire careers. You had Magic and Bird. That's four. You had Chris Mullin. You had Patrick Ewing. You had David Robinson. You had Charles Barkley. You had Christian Laettner. Of course, you had Mike and Scotty and Clyde Drexler. Okay, that's all 12. So that was the greatest basketball team ever assembled. You had it all. And so, like I mentioned, those guys went on a tear, went through, they were like rock stars. They won the tournament by an average of 44 points per game, I believe, was it? And they won the gold medal with little to no resistance. But not only did the United States manage to reassert its dominance in international men's basketball, what it also did was take the global game to a whole new level. And this is where we get to Jalen Rose. So if you watch the NBA now, there are more international players in the league than we've ever seen before. As of, what is it, 2022-23 season, which is last year, 22.6% of NBA players were occupied by international players, foreign born guys. And so that was just last year. I think that's up to like 30% now. But going into last year, Canada had 57 players in the league. France had 40. Serbia had 30. Australia had 30. Nigeria 29. Brazil 18. Argentina 15. Puerto Rico 15. And then you got, onesies and twosies from here and there throughout the world. So you see the absolute global influence. And then obviously there's a lot of professional leagues overseas, and they're constantly sending guys. It's very possible that, again, the number one pick in this year's draft could be a foreign-born player. I think the guy from France, I think it's Alex Sars or something like that is his name. We saw Victor Wembanyama, number one pick, generational guy, generational talent, last year's draft. So we're seeing it. And so now not Jalen Rose, I'm sorry, David Stern's dream has come to fruition. Adam Silver was recently on an interview, and he stated that I think 70% of NBA viewership comes from overseas. And so the overseas is there, right? So you spread the game, it's global, you're getting more global money coming in. Realistically, right, you can spread the game all you want, you can make it as global as you like, but what's the end goal? To get that global money coming into the league, right, to continue to fill their coffers. But now we're getting to a point where the scary part is some of our best players in the NBA are coming from overseas. Now, here's where Jalen Rose steps in. So, yesterday, Jalen Rose put out a tweet, and it was pretty much a warning. Dear US born NBA, dear US born basketball players, put in that work tirelessly and show discipline. Otherwise, NBA jobs are becoming extinct. What does he mean by that? There's 450, what is it, 30 NBA teams, 450 roster spots in the NBA. And if 30% of those right now, roughly 1 in 3, is occupied by a foreign player, and that's only going to grow as the game continues to expand globally and as players continue to improve globally, that means there's going to be less and less players for American-born, less and less, roster spots for American-born players, and that's a serious, serious thing. Now, I'm not one of those guys who says that people from other countries shouldn't be able to come here and do things. This is America, right?
This is America, Jack.
Shout out Coming to America, John Amos. Anyway, we always talk about this being America and the land of opportunity and the place where you can come and fulfill your dreams. So if somebody's going to work hard enough and have the opportunity and come over here and put in that work, why shouldn't they be able to? And realistically, as American-born players, uh, you guys should do what Jalen Rose says and diligently put in the work before you lose your job to someone else. And that's not a foreign-born player coming over here to steal your job. They took it from you because you didn't want it badly enough. And there's a lot of differences between the foreign-born player and the American player, and some of that is our basketball culture, AAU, and really kissing the butt of these players, and these players being lifted up and put on a pedestal from the time they're identified as quote unquote basketball prodigies at a young age, versus the overseas thing where a really good player can go professional earlier, and as a young player they're getting their butts kicked by grown men, and it's helping them develop more. There's much more practice overseas than there is in the States. Even at the professional level, a lot of times you see 2-a-days and maybe 1 or 2 games a week, versus in the States you play a lot more than you practice. So the fundamentals for foreign-born players are there, and it's totally different. And what's happening is, as a result, we are seeing the difference in the players. And what do I mean we're seeing the difference in the players? For example, the last 6 NBA MVPs have been foreign-born players. And often in those top 5, you'll have 2 or 3 guys who are international players. All right, let's take a look at this. So if you follow the NBA, unless you live under a rock, you know that Nikola Jokic, he is Serbian. He's won the MVP this past season. That was his 3rd. Okay, watch him. Beautiful move on Gobert there. But coincidentally, Rudy Gobert, 4-time Defensive Player of the Year. He's French. Then we see last year's MVP, Joel Embiid. Then we see the previous 2 years MVP, Nikola Jokic. The prior 2 years before that, Giannis Antetokounmpo, the Greek Freak. And so the last 6 MVPs awarded, although it's been 3 players, it's been awarded to foreign-born players. And if you look at the top 5 this year, Jokic, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, he's Canadian, followed up by Luka Doncic, he's Slovenian. So you're seeing the tide turning, and you're really seeing it shifting towards the international players. Now, does that mean that the Americans don't have great players? That's absolutely not what that means. You got your Jason Tatums, you got your Kyrie Irvings, you got your Jason Tatum, Kyrie Irving. I forgot the third guy I was going to mention it. Ant Edwards, Ja Morant, when he gets back from injury, Zion Williamson, if he can stay healthy. There's a lot of extremely talented American-born players. But the fact is this, like I mentioned earlier, it's such a different game overseas, the way these guys are raised and the basketball culture over there breeds just a different type of player, a different type of mindset. And whether you think that's better or worse, you're seeing the results on the floor. And it's something to think about. I mentioned Victor Wembanyama, last year's #1 overall pick. He made Rookie of the Year pretty much unanimously. I don't think it was unanimous, but pretty much, right? He was Rookie of the Year. He's French. Rudy Gobert, he won his 4th Defensive Player of the Year. That probably is going to get him into the Basketball Hall of Fame. Now, we got to take that with a grain of salt. The Basketball Hall of Fame is the weakest of all our professional sports leagues. But regardless, the fact is he's now tied with Ben Wallace and the great Dikembe Mutombo for most Defensive Player of the Year awards with 4. And both of those guys are in the Hall of Fame. So chances are Rudy Gobert is going to be there at some point when he's done playing as well. So anyway, point I'm trying to make here is Jalen Rose is trying to give these guys the warning. Now, I'm sure you're going to have a lot of American fans and you're going to have a lot of American players who may take that the wrong way. But what he's saying is, listen, you got to get back on your grind. You got to put the work in. You got to change your mentality. And Kobe Bryant, the late, great Kobe Bryant, he talked about all of this, how the American basketball culture, especially AAU, is doing the players a disservice. And I like that. Kobe said it because he's a guy that is so well regarded and revered among players from all over the world. But the fact is, he obviously is an American. He was born in the United States, but he spent a lot of his formative time in Europe. And so he kind of learned the basics and the fundamentals from a European standpoint. Then he came over here and, he started to do his thing and obviously went down as one of the greatest NBA players of all time. So he can see it from both perspectives, both as an American and someone who was raised in the European basketball culture. So these are things that he spoke to. And so we gotta take that. We got to listen. Not we, because obviously I'm not any type of basketball player. Those days are long gone for me. But the point is, the players now and the fans now, they got to listen to that. And instead of getting upset, and if you do get upset, there's an expression, hit dogs holler, right? That means somebody touched the nerve. But Jalen Rose is trying to put the warning out there because the international presence is going to continue to grow. International players are going to continue to improve. For instance, we have the Summer Olympics this year in Paris, and there is absolutely no reason why LeBron James and Steph Curry and Kevin Durant need to be on the Olympic team again. But why is that? Because they're worried that with the traction that the rest of the world has gained in international basketball, that if they're not on that team, the United States could possibly lose. And so that says so much about the growth between 1992 and today. Was that 32 years? That says a tremendous amount about how much the world has closed the gap on the United States in basketball over the past 32 years. And what's it going to be once LeBron and Steph and KD are gone? Because they're not going to be on the next Olympic team. And that's another 4 years for the rest of the world to get better. And that's another 4 years for the rest of the world to continue to inject players into the NBA. So I think it's time to take Jalen Rose very, very seriously if you're an NBA American-born basketball player, or if you're an American-born basketball player, period, or if you're an American basketball fan, because he sees the writing on the wall and he knows what he's talking about. But what I want to know from you is, do you think there's any value in what Jalen Rose is saying? Do you think his warning has legitimacy? Leave your comments in the comment section. Can't wait to hear from you. I'll be back with you next episode, and I'm out. Peace.